Hello! This is the SharePoint Dev Ecosystem monthly community call for November 2018. It is November 13th, and this is our monthly call. I want to thank everybody for joining. Again, apologies if you had a little bit of difficulty getting in this morning. We were scrambling to fix a broken Skype meeting invite, so apologies for that. The AKA link should now be updated and working for folks, and based on the number of people joining, it seems like that's probably the case. So let's get started. Our agenda for today, we've got updates, of course, across the SharePoint development landscape, latest news, a monthly summary, and some other details. And then we've got two demos. The first from David Warner on list formatting, deployment, and development with VS Code. Really cool demo there. And then from myself, an update on some of the stuff around the PnPjs libraries. Some of the really want to highlight some of the great contributions from folks we got in last month's release. And then at the end, we'll have a little bit of time, I think, for Q&A, but we shall see. First off, we always like to start with a little bit of a description about the SharePoint developer group, the patterns and practices community, and sort of the way that's set up. And the number, we have a number of calls. We'll talk about those here in a little bit, but as well sort of our structure. So you can kind of imagine there's this loose group of folks in the middle of that onion diagram there that you could call the core team. And then outside of that, we've got the special interest groups. And then around all of that, we're all part of the entire SharePoint development community. So some links there over on the left, SPPNP-community, will get you into the Microsoft Tech community that gets you to the Patterns and Practices community page. It's got details on all the things we do in Patterns and Practices. The first call, item there, the bi-weekly SharePoint framework call, is our first special interest group call, and these special interest groups allow us to do a little bit of a deep dive into different topic areas. Right now we've got two of those. We've got the client-side development SharePoint framework call, and then we have a general development call, which is that second one there, so you can find the links to both of those. You're, of course, welcome to join either or both of those, depending on your interest areas. And then as well, we've got the monthly community calls, with which you are in one now. And so those are sort of a roll-up discussion about all things SharePoint across all of the development spaces. So whether it's PowerShell, whether it's JavaScript, SharePoint framework, whatever, we will cover all that in the monthly calls. I've got a question here. The SharePoint framework call is on Thanksgiving in the U.S. Yes, it is. We are going to have that call because not everybody is in the U.S., but understand it'll probably be lighter attendance for folks. So no worries if you can't make it. We'll, of course, get it recorded, and we'll be out there in the YouTube channels for folks to watch after the fact. But it's just a little too difficult to reschedule something, you know, for like a Wednesday or something like that with that gets this many participants. So it is going to be on Thanksgiving. If you can make it, awesome. Look forward to seeing you. If you can't make it, hope you can check out the recordings. So getting into some of our monthly metrics, I'll go through some of these numbers, but really this slide is all about saying thank you to all of you out there in the community for helping us grow what we do and being part of what we do by your contributions, by your participation, and by, you know, just sort of being part of the entire SharePoint development community. So some high-level statistics, just to give you an idea. We've got 178,000 minutes of watch time in YouTube. That's coming off of 27,000 views. We've got 52,000 unique visitors in GitHub. That's a 2-week rolling average, as well as 253,000 views of our GitHub content. Again, that's a 2-week rolling average. And then our Microsoft documentation, docs.microsoft.com, around SharePoint development is getting almost 1 million views a month now. So that's up to 960,000 views. So that's really a testament to all of you and the growth of SharePoint development, the continued growth of SharePoint development across all the topics, and especially SharePoint framework. And then we're seeing some really impressive stuff around the reusable components. And those reusable components are really everything that we in PnP do. So that's the PowerShell libraries, that's the CSOM libraries, the JavaScript libraries, that's the reusable controls, that's the CLI, that's the new Yeoman generator, which we talked about on the last special interest group for client-side development last Thursday. So we're seeing 10 billion requests coming through all of those things into Office 365. We're seeing, and that doesn't actually even capture the stuff that's being used on premises, so that's an even bigger number. We've got 17,000, almost 18,000 unique tenants are using something out of patterns and practices, and the most used capability continues to be the provisioning engine for, I think, obvious reasons, being its incredible capabilities and how it really simplifies the deployment for folks. But everything else is creeping up. We're seeing increased usage across everything patterns and practices is doing. And again, all of this is just a roundabout way to say thank you to all of you out there for being part of this, helping us grow and helping us get better by your contributions and your feedback. So thank you to all of you out there very much. So how about SharePoint Framework? How's the adoption? So these are two graphs that show growth, but what they're saying is usage per user and usage per tenant is both going up. And the reason we show these and talk about these is we get questions a lot on both from individuals and from companies. Are people actually using SharePoint Framework? Should we invest in SharePoint Framework? Should we begin transitioning to SharePoint Framework? And the answer is absolutely yes on those things. You should definitely begin to transfer to SharePoint Framework. Have a look at what SharePoint Framework can do for you, both in the cloud and for newer versions of SharePoint on-premises as well. Definitely check that out. We're seeing tremendous growth, so this what this means in kind of a big picture sense is continued investment for Microsoft to grow it, continued investment in the community, and continued investment in new features for the foreseeable future. So definitely time to jump over to SharePoint Framework, begin learning that if you have not already. If you're looking for documentation and guidance on SharePoint development, definitely check out spdev-docs. That's aka.ms/spdev-docs. That will take you to the Microsoft SharePoint development documentation. And this is SharePoint documentation for developers all up. So if you're new to SharePoint Framework, this is going to have information on getting started with SharePoint Framework, how to set up your development environment, tutorials to walk through on setting up your first web part, your first extension, how to deploy those things and get started, as well as more advanced topics on there. Documentation around SharePoint capabilities itself, such as the REST services, webhooks. As well, you'll have documentation there on SharePoint add-ins, on managed code development, so the old the still existent WSP model if you're on premises, as well as overview and general guidance around SharePoint development. So we're working on getting everything consolidated there, and of course, not everything's there, not everything's perfect. So if you see gaps, please let us know. We appreciate the feedback. We do try and get those things updated, and then every time you report an issue or comment on some of that documentation, that actually gets turned around and logged in GitHub, so we are able to track those things and get those resolved just as quickly as we can. Again, can't always get things updated immediately, but we're doing our best, and we appreciate the feedback, so we are all working to grow and make things better across the documentation for everybody. So appreciate folks' feedback there. As always, I'd like to mention, we hope you're not, but if you are running into issues around SharePoint Framework or around deploying your SharePoint Framework solutions or upgrading your SharePoint Framework solutions, do please report those. aka.ms/spdev-issues will take you to a GitHub issues list, and that is monitored by their SharePoint engineering team themselves to get those resolved, get you feedback on your issues, and make sure that we're getting responses to people so that we can, again, make everything better for everybody. So issues range from bugs, requests for enhancements, or just sort of general comments, though general comments are generally better for user voice or for the Microsoft tech community. But if you're seeing a real blocker just inside SharePoint itself, you can report it there, and we'll do our best to get it routed to the right team. And did want to mention, obviously, lots of people are reporting issues, so we are doing our best to catch up on those and, work on an internal plan on how to triage those a little bit better. As all of you know, it always comes back down to resource availability and how we can task our time and get the right focus there. But we are working on that, and we do try and be as responsive as we can. So if you are seeing problems, definitely please report those issues, and we will do just our best to get those resolved as quickly as we can. So now, SharePoint Framework 1.7 is now available. That was released into GA. So some big things there coming out of this release. So dynamic data sharing between components is now in GA, which is a big step forward there. Support in SharePoint 2019 in the Yeoman generator, support for SharePoint 2019 in the Yeoman generator. Domain isolated web parts, which I think is a super great addition here, and that's going to get you some enhanced security for scenarios where you need that sort of extra security for your web part, or perhaps you want to have your own Azure Active Directory app ID for some functionality in one web part, but maybe don't want to grant those permissions, to every SharePoint Framework web part that might get deployed. So the domain isolated web parts are a great way to accomplish that. As well, you've likely a lot of you have seen the demos or the posts around the Microsoft Teams experience. So you can now actually show and deploy your SharePoint Framework content in Teams as a tab, which is super powerful and sort of hints, I guess I can say this out loud, hints towards the direction we might be going with a lot of our Office development. So definitely have a look at that. Support for Teams apps in SharePoint, so that's kind of a two-way support back and forth. We've got list subscriptions have come in, and then something that could get that hasn't gotten a ton of press, but I think is going to prove to be really valuable moving forward, is the single-page apps. So that sort of immersive experience for single-page apps. I think folks are going to be able to do a lot of really cool stuff with that. Kind of opens up some new scenarios, and I think we'll see some really cool things. So if you do some cool stuff with 1.7 and would like to demo your work, please let us know. We'd love to get you on an upcoming call for a demo. Again, I always say it, and I'll continue to say it. I think the community demos are one of the more valuable parts of the call, because it gives folks, one, a platform to talk about their work, and all of us an opportunity to learn from each other. So if you're working on some cool stuff, want to get it demoed, just let us know in Patterns and Practices, and we'll work to get you on an upcoming call. So excited to see what folks come up with the new capabilities in 1.7. As always, aka.ms/SPFX will get you to the SharePoint Framework specific documentation and guidance. So check that out if you're just getting started on a SharePoint Framework or want to see what's new in the 1.7 release. So really looking forward to see what folks come up with the new capabilities that have been made available through that. As well, we've got all of our products are now updated. Products, in quotes, are now updated. Open source things are now updated. So the JavaScript library, the CSOM stuff is updated. The PowerShell is updated. The provisioning code within the core libraries is updated. So we've got all our latest fixes. latest fixes, and want to thank again everybody that contributed across all of the many things we're doing. It's kind of, when you take a step back and look at the growth and look at what we've been able to do, again, that's all up to all of you in the community supporting it and helping us by reporting issues and submitting your contributions to GitHub and helping us grow it. So it's really impressive, and if you're not using all of the things, definitely I'd encourage you to try out the different areas in patterns and practices. You might find some new capabilities that might help you on some of your projects. So we're doing our best, and appreciate all of your help and your best to get us there. So thanks to everybody again out there in the community. And then we have an ongoing weekly... Sorry, I'm going to find somebody there and mute them. Mute. So please do remember to mute as you join the call. It really helps with the recording. And so SharePoint Dev Weekly, I guess we're calling these a podcast or a webcast, but these are super informal, fun, I'd say around about 30 minutes, but if you've ever been on a call with Vesa, 30 minutes is just a loose idea. But these are a cool summary of kind of what's been going on that week in SharePoint development. So it might be talking about new releases, it might be talking about a certain area of SharePoint, it might be talking about a specific demo, but it's a fun, informal kind of weekly chat. So it's usually Vesa and Waldeck and then a special guest. This last week, Velen was on there. And in previous weeks, we've had Paolo, we've had other folks from the community join in there. Erwin, I think, has even been on there. So really check those out. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great way to kind of get caught up just in a fun way on what's been going on in SharePoint development that week. We want Patrick as a visitor. Yeah, maybe. We'll see what we can do. They record it in like in the middle of the day in European time when Patrick is very much still asleep. So we'll see if we can make that happen. I'd love to do it, and I think it'd be a lot of fun. Wake up early. Yeah, well, I have a 1.5-year-old, so I wake up early all the time. As always, just stay up late. That would be powerful. Thank you for your assistance within last month. So I'm not going to read all these names because as there's just too many of you folks, but I think I've said thank you about a dozen times so far, and we'll continue to do that. But thank you all. You really do make our work possible, and you make this community possible. So thank you to everybody. And for folks looking to get involved, please do. A great way to get involved is to jump in, report an issue, submit a pull request. You're involved already just by joining these calls. And seeing the community grow is really rewarding for us, and hopefully rewarding for all of you who are benefiting from and contributing to the growth of that community. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Really can't say that enough, and we very much appreciate it from all of you. As well, we do want to call out some of the companies that specifically allow their folks or give their folks time to contribute to patterns and practices and help to grow that as well, either by incorporating that into their training or allowing their folks dedicated time to contribute back to patterns and practices. So I want to thank all of these companies for their time and allowing their folks to work on the patterns and practices. So these are folks who have sent us their logos and are allowing us to use their logos here. If you work for a company or own a company and your company is giving you dedicated time to work on patterns and practices and they would like their logo included here, happy to do that. Please reach out to us and we will get you guys, get your logo set up on this slide and as well into the thanks. But we just sort of need your clear kind of written permission. That can be something like we give you permission to use our logo on the slide. That's great. But just something and the logo you would like us to use, and we can get that up here as well. So thank you to all these companies for allowing their folks time to contribute back to patterns and practices. So very much appreciate that. And then I want to thank as well folks, these are folks internal to Microsoft that are helping one way or another. Either you'll see some of these names are the folks actually creating the SharePoint framework, for example, or creating other features of SharePoint, or our marketing folks, or our PMing folks. And some of the rest of us just happen to work at Microsoft and contribute and be part of Patterns and Practices. So thanks as well to all of you inside Microsoft who are helping out to either make SharePoint a thing or help us grow and make Patterns and Practices better. So thank you to all of you as well. So a quick note, one of the things we've been talking about in the core team is around this idea of are we doing too many calls now? Have we kind of oversaturated things? So we have the bi-weekly special interest group calls. We've got this monthly call. We have now the weekly SharePoint Dev podcast, which isn't much a call, but is more content. And as well, we have the videos that come out fairly frequently. So is this just too much content? Are we doing too good a job? And so should we drop potentially this monthly call? And so this isn't an announcement. We're not doing it. We're asking for your feedback as we do with everything. So there's a link down there, aka.ms/spdev-call-feedback. If you care to take, it's like I think a 2-question and a fill-in-the-box survey. Don't give us your credit card number or anything, but check that out. We'd appreciate your feedback. Definitely, if your feedback is keep them all, would love to hear that. If your feedback is, we could drop one or the other. We'd love to hear from you. Again, everything is feedback driven. So this is us. This was just sort of came up in discussion, and the result of that discussion was, well, let's just ask the community. And so this is us asking you in the community. Appreciate everybody saying keep them all here in the IM window. If you could just take a minute and go to the spdev-call-feedback link there and just say keep them all, that is great. So we'll do our best there. So, appreciate everybody's enthusiasm. And if folks want us to keep them, we're definitely going to keep the calls. Like that's, like I said, we thought we'd ask, and we didn't know. Maybe people would say we have too many, it takes up too much time or whatnot. So, we definitely will keep them if that's where the feedback lands. Question there, is there a way to get some live support to our questions? And the answer there is really just no, not through Patterns and Practices. We just can't scale for that. So depending on what your question is, you've got Microsoft Premier support. Depending on what your relationship with Microsoft is, you might have some free hours there. But we really can't scale to just give people live free support to questions. So I understand why folks would want that, but it's really just not something we can scale to. Because at the end of the day, we'd essentially just be providing free consulting services. And I don't know, I've not taken a lot of business classes, but I don't believe that scales well as a business strategy. Checking with pets.com, and they're no longer here. So here we go, the demos. So the first demo up is David. David, if you are ready to go and want to take over the presentation.
Sure thing. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay, so should be sharing momentarily. Let me know when you can see.
Loading. Loading.
Spinning.
And I've got it. So go ahead and take it away.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Most everybody on this call knows me by now, but for those that don't, my name is David Warner. I work for Catapult Systems. Try to be active, really enjoy SharePoint and the PnP community. Pretty positive about it, and it's really been very useful. So if you haven't been involved, definitely try to get involved. Today, we're going to talk about list formatting. Everybody here knows that I'm pretty much a big fan of it. I've done a lot with Chris and trying to contribute. And developing with list formatting can be pretty basic. There's a lot of tools. Chris has created a really fantastic web part for that, and there's other tools that are out there as well. But when you get down to the basic principle of creating a list formatting definition, whether that's for column formatting or view formatting, there are some challenges in the deployment process, right? And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at what those challenges without a development deployment process is that's automated. What are some of the benefits with it? And then we're going to combine a couple tools, PowerShell and Visual Studio Code, to perform that automation. Again, very basic strategy here, but we're going to see how it can maybe make the experience a little more seamless. So the challenges of non-automated deployment. Cumbersome copy-paste. You could imagine the rinse, wash, repeat process. It's not hard. You're working within VS Code, and you should be working within VS Code because you get all of the IntelliSense. So you'll be writing it, you'll copy, you'll paste. Maybe you'll have two browser and VS Code up side by side, and you'll switch over to your browser and you'll paste it, you'll apply, you'll save, you'll see it, you'll switch back, and you'll start rinse, wash, and repeat. That cyclical process, right? And it's a little cumbersome. Then with site column propagation, because you can apply a list formatting or column formatting definition to a site column, then you might need to go to the column or the site column, apply it, propagate it down, switch over to your list, refresh, and rinse, wash, repeat, right? So it's a little bit challenges. There are better ways, and there could be better ways. The benefits of an automated deployment is exactly the opposite of what I described. No copy paste needed. We'll see the JSON definition will be automatically deployed to the list, view, or site column, right? We can choose on how we want to do that. And then in the case of the site column, we get propagation. So you'll update the site column, and then you don't have to worry about going to the site column. You'll just go straight to your browser, refresh, and you're good to go. So the tools, as I mentioned, that we're going to use in this sample is PnP PowerShell. So it's going to use PowerShell, and it's going to use the PnP tools. It's going to deploy the list formatting definition to any one of those three. We're going to focus on a list view today, view formatting definition. And within Visual Studio Code, we're going to use custom tasks to do that. So we're going to see how we can create a custom task. That custom task is going to execute a PowerShell script, and then that will deploy everything out to SharePoint for us. So let's take a quick look at the list that we're going to work with. This is just a simple list. It's a student's grades. Now, this is using a view formatting that's actually in the list formatting repo right now. So if you wanted to go out and see it and play with it, you could. But this is the list in the raw, right? It's just a simple list. It's representing student grades. And what it does is it gives each student a numeric grade for each quarter. Right, so you got a 99 or an 80 or 100. Chris is way better than I am at school, so he's got a better grade overall. But this principle obviously could be applied to any trending number across time, whether it's quarters or halves or monthly, whatever the case may be. So we've got a view formatting definition that we've applied. This is the one that's out in the repo, and you can see what it does is it provides a grade to each quarter. And that grade is based on the average numeric grade, right? So it combines in quarter two, combines quarter one, quarter two numeric grade, gives you the average, assigns a grade. Gives you the average for 1 through 3, assigns a grade, so on and so forth, right? So you can see exactly how it's trending. It's just a nice card look to do that. The formatting definition is a little complex. And so not very many people are going to come directly into here to edit this formatting definition. And even if they are working within Visual Studio Code to create it, they're probably not going to start at the very top and finish at the very bottom and feel confident and done. So you're going to be doing a lot of checking it in, checking to make sure everything's looking right, moving on to the next section. It does utilize the Excel style formatting, which is nice, but it still can be, which makes it less verbose, but it still can be a little bit long, right? It can get a little bit long. So we'll go ahead and close that. So what we're going to do is we're going to show how we can just make a simple change. We're not going to get anything crazy because the point here is the deployment process, not the editing of the actual view formatting. So we're just going to go in and we're going to apply a text shadow to our label here. Just real simple. And so what I've done is I've set up a file folder structure. All right, I've set up a file folder structure that allows me to do this pretty successfully. And how that looks is this. So I will set up a VS Code folder, which is where the custom task will end up living. We'll see how that's created. I've got a folder here for my JSON definitions. So you can see I've got one here for my student grade view and then the student name. We're going to focus on the grade view today. And then I've got PowerShell scripts that represent the deployment to the various entities where a formatting definition can be applied. So you've got list column, you've got list view, you've got site column, and how you execute those is through the use of custom tasks. So let's jump over to VS Code and see how that looks. So the JSON definition, as I mentioned, it's the same one you saw there. It's fairly verbose, and so here we're looking at over 500 lines of code, right, as you separate it out. So again, working on this from beginning to end can be a little difficult. What we're going to do is take a look at the PowerShell script. So the PowerShell script is very simple. It can be more robust than this, but in its most simplest form, what it does is you provide for the view, you provide your connection information, your list name, your view name, and then a path to your JSON definition, right? Now you can get more robust in this. There's lots of different ways to do this. I'm just keeping it very simple so that it's understandable and repeatable. And then what you do is the real magic happens down here. So it takes the list formatting JSON from the JSON file. It connects to the view. It then uses that view to set the view using the set PnPjs command, and it sets the custom formatter property from the JSON that's found in the file. So it's very simple. Now you'll notice that I've got one for each type, right? So list column, list view, site column, etc. Now each of these are verbose in whether or not they're connecting to a specific view or list name. And so you would update the PowerShell for each time you're connecting to a specific view, list column, site column, etc. A little problematic, but not major. You're usually working on a definition. It's going to be complex, and that's where you're gonna spend some time with it. So it's not like you're going to spend 5 minutes creating a definition here that you're going to spend more time setting up your scaffolding for. So what we're going to do is I'm going to close the PowerShell script here. And I'll close up that folder. Now we're going to go ahead and create some custom tasks. And to do that, you just engage the command palette and you would select configure task. And you can do a search on tasks or task, and you'll see there's lots of different options. In this case, we just want to go ahead and select configure task. And it's going to say create task.json file from a template, right? So it asks us which type of tasks. This is what's built in, so we'll go ahead and select that. We're just going to go ahead and select the default here, MS Build, and you see what it's done. I already had a list formatting one here, but I wanted to show you exactly how you can create it from scratch. And what it's done is it's built this default kind of template for us. And we don't need any of this. I've already got one that I'm going to go ahead and go over, but you can see how easy it is to create. So I'm going to open this guy, which is the true tasks definition for us, and I'm going to paste it in here, and then we'll quickly review it. So you'll see that for each one of my PowerShell scripts, I've got a custom task. A label, which is what will show up when we want to execute it, and it connects to the different PowerShell scripts. So we see we've got a site column, a list column, and a list view. Of course, this is the one we're going to focus on today because our PowerShell script is going to connect to this view formatting definition, and it's going to connect to my SharePoint site, and it's going to deploy it. So it's very easy. So we've put this in here. We've got 3, so I'll go ahead and close that. Now, we want to go ahead, as I mentioned, and just apply some simple text shading or shadowing to the student name. So I'm going to go ahead and make my change. We're going to go ahead and give it a try with just a couple of pixels and orange. So I'll save that. And then to execute that task, you just re-engage the command palette and select Run Task. Again, you can search on tasks, and if you're running this quite a bit, it's going to nicely populate to the top there for you. And so we'll go ahead and select Run Task. And what you see is now it's aware. It sees the tasks.json. It's aware of the tasks that I've defined that I want to do, and it gives me the choice. Obviously, I've been running through my demo to make sure it works, so list view formatting is bubbled up to the top as a recently used task. We'll go ahead and select that. And we get an option about scanning outputs and all the different things that we could do to scan the output. In this case, we don't necessarily need to do that, so you can just simply say continue without scanning the task output. Now what happens is it brings up the terminal down here, and it executes the PowerShell script. And then the PowerShell script just has a nice little output if everything ran right. List view formatting definition has been updated. So we're going to go back to our list here. We're going to refresh. And we see, okay, great. It's been executed and it deployed it. A little hard on the eyes, right? All of this may be a little hard on the eyes, but I'm matching my color scheme. So we're going to go back into VS Code, and we're just going to go ahead and change this to silver, save, hit F1. You can see how fast we can do this. Continue that scan. You could tell it to never scan if you wanted, so you wouldn't get that request. Bam, it's done. We go back to our browser again, refresh, and we see the gray is a little easier on the eyes now. And so now you could further enhance this in VS Code, and I won't get into this example just for purposes of time, because I know Patrick has some demo too. You could also tie these tasks to keyboard shortcuts, right? So if we didn't want to have to engage the command palette, we absolutely could execute a custom task while we're using a keyboard task, which makes it even faster. And that way you just Control-Shift F11, which is what I use because it's available, and it works great. And it deploys everything out. So you can see the nice seamless process here. You could also get more robust with your PowerShell script to open the browser for you, refresh the browser for you automatically. So if you were to keep them side by side, you don't need to go back over to the browser and refresh. You could really get that PowerShell script to be more robust, to do all of the work, literally, and all you have to do is keep them side by side and see the updates as you go. It's really powerful. So going back to the slides, we see that the tools and commands are set PNP field, set PNP view. Now you'll notice that it's a yes for PowerShell, but it's a no for CLI. And so anyone who doesn't use PowerShell and CLI may be going, well, David, thanks for the not so productive productivity tip, you loser. What about us? We're not using PowerShell. Don't have to, because Waldic rocks. So setting up this demo and this strategy, I reached out to Waldic and inquired on CLI's capability. This was last week. So this all happened in the last few days, which is amazingly awesome, shows the power of the community. SPO field set and SPO list view set did not exist in the CLI at that time. They hadn't included it yet, and it was just kind of glossed over. So he and I worked together. Mostly when I say he and I, he did a lot of the work in getting it into the beta. So it is now available in the beta. And then he and I synced up this morning actually, and recorded a demo on how that can be done with the CLI and source code and all of that. So it really is pretty awesome, and now across the board, how across the community we have so much contribution, and you can see you can utilize this strategy with PowerShell and CLI, so nobody's excluded. It shows the power of the community. There's going to be some samples that are input or going to be uploaded into the GitHub repo for list formatting. I believe Chris had just mentioned me and said there's going to be a tools folder there, and I've got the CLI code from Waldic, and I've got the PowerShell code myself, so we'll get those uploaded into the repo. And that's the demo. Thank you, guys.
Great stuff. Very cool. So that'll be available shortly, right?
Yeah. Yep. As quick as I can get it uploaded. I just got the message from Chris that they are going to put it in tools. So.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Yeah, so super great productivity tips. I think there might be a few questions down there in the IM window for you, and then I think we'll have a little bit of time here at the end for Q&A.
Cool. I'll take a look.
Thank you, David, for another great demo there. And before I get started, I'll just say, can anybody see my monitor? Always like to ask.
I can see it.
Great. One person can, so I'm just going to assume everybody can then, huh? So what I want to talk about today is some of the updates that came out in the latest PnPjs release. So I want to set the stage a little bit. So what we've got here, this is SharePoint Framework web part. Pretty simple web part. I've run the Yeoman generator. Got my web part here, and the only change I've made into this file is imported the setup function from the common library, and this would work as well. You could do it from the SP or from Graph. It all actually ends up behind the scenes in the same place, but I've grabbed setup I've given that a different name, so it's a little clearer, and I'm running the PnP setup here. I added an onInit method to the web part, and what this does, you'll see this in the documentation as well, but this gives the library the context of your SharePoint Framework web part. And inside SharePoint Framework, the only true context is going to be sort of a dumb sentence, but the only true context is this context object. So for example, in classic SharePoint development, you had some global variables that gave you information about the page. I think we all are familiar and have used those, but those are no longer available or valid even if you can get to them inside your SharePoint Framework content. And one of the reasons I bring that up is you're starting to see SharePoint Framework being used in Teams and being used in other places, being surfaced there, and so you might see subtle changes in that context object in terms of URLs and stuff like that. So it's very important, not just when you're using the PnPjs stuff, but when you're writing your own web parts, and even if you're not using PnPjs, you always base everything you do on the values found in the this.context object. And that's going to make sure, as SharePoint Framework possibly expands, that you are operating where you think you're operating with the right URLs and so forth. So we pass that into the library there with the PnP setup. And then that's the only change I've made into this file. And then I've gone here, and this is, again, this is just the component that gets automatically output for you when you create a new web part. And I've updated that with some things, and let's walk through those now. The first thing I did is I've got just a site script fragment here. It doesn't really do anything amazing. It's just as an example. It creates a list named employees and adds a field to it, and that's all well and good. But we'll see what we're using that for here in a second. And then our render method, I've just got, I have this component called funcRunner that just takes an action and runs it and updates itself once that promise is fulfilled. So I'll take a quick look at that just so you can see what's happening. In our render, if we don't have a result, we just say loading, and then once we mount, we run our action, and then we set our state with whatever the result is, and then that'll re-trigger the render, and we are very dangerously setting the inner HTML. I always feel very James Bondy when I do this, and we're just running the JSON right into that. So it's a really simple little component, but it's nice. I find it nice for testing things very quickly, and also for doing demos like this, because you don't have to worry about formatting. You're really just concentrating on the requests getting made. So I've got 4 of those here, and I want to step through each of those. One of the things I want to highlight, this is a super simple request, but what this is actually going to show, and we'll go through all the code and then we'll look at the page and actually see the stuff run. But what this is going to show is, so we're going to connect to the Microsoft Graph from a SharePoint Framework web part using the Azure Active Directory stuff. And one of the big improvements, this wasn't actually in, this was in SharePoint Framework 1.6, and we've now taken advantage of it in the latest PnPjs, where there'll no longer be pop-ups. So this came from, again, community feedback saying, can you guys do something here? And the answer is absolutely yes. We were just waiting for SharePoint Framework to solve the problem for us because we knew they were working on it, and they did an amazing job with this. So there's some new stuff in there called the AAD token provider, and you can grab, that's what we're using, but you're going to see this graph request work with no pop-ups and no other effort on my part as the user when this actually runs, and we'll be able to get the list of groups. One of the other things I wanted to highlight, our graph batching had actually, I guess, been broken for a little while. We hadn't looked at that since batching went GA. So again, got some great feedback from the community in the form of a bug, and so we went, oops, and we got that fixed. So graph batching works. We're actually going to see that work here now, and that works syntax-wise exactly the same as it does in the SP library. So if you used batching in the SP library and you want to use batching with the graph library, it's the exact same format, the exact same way you build your queries. So we're creating a batch off of that root graph object, which let me show you. We're importing graph from @pnp/graph, and that's the root of your Fluent API chain, is that graph object. In exactly the same way that the SP object is the root of your SharePoint Fluent API chain. So you get your batch off of create batch, and then you just supply it to each of these things. So what this is actually saying is I want, and I'm not doing anything with these results, you can see that, but what's happening here is we're saying I want to get the groups in the batch, and I want to get my drives in that batch, and calling that get operation essentially will queue the request into the batch. Something to note, a lot of you, myself included, like to use await. You can't use await with the batching, because what will end up happening here is this await, so get still returns a promise, so I can do things like then, and I can process the results for my individual requests once the batch runs, right? So I have those results there, but get still returns a promise. And if you await here, you'll never get past this because you'll be stuck waiting for that promise to finish. So when you're doing batching, you need to use the then syntax to process your results individually there. So just something to keep in mind if you're doing the batching. And that's, I believe, called out in the documentation as well. So we're going to get those things in the batch. So we just passed our batch there. And then once you've loaded up your requests into the batch, one of the other things we added, again, from community feedback, some great feedback, was in Graph, you have a limit of 20 requests per batch. So we'll actually automatically handle that for you. So if we had 23 requests and we add them all to the batch, that'll actually get executed as 2 batches under the hood. The first will run as 20 and the last will run as 3. So just another nice feature we've added in there. So you just like working with the SP library called batch.execute, and that itself returns a promise, and batch done, we're just sort of, this is what our result is going to be. This is actually what's going to show up in our little func runner component. And then 2 other great additions in the last release to the SharePoint libraries were the addition of site scripts and site designs endpoints. So this was a community contribution, great stuff to see come in, super valuable, and it makes it really easy to create and use site scripts and then apply those using site designs. So there's 2 new endpoints or chaining points off of the SP object, the first being site scripts and the next being site designs. But so we're just going to create a site script, and you can see here, this is where I'm using just this site script content from up above. So this is where you would insert whatever your site script was. So there's a lot of great community tools out there now for building these site scripts. I definitely recommend using those. They're super great. Check those out or build them by hand if you like. But here you can see we're not doing any batching or anything, so we can use await just in the way you would expect. And then what we're doing is calling create site script, giving it a great name. So we should call this demo site script. I think we're up to 2 at this point. And then just this is a description, and this is your site script content. So we're creating that. We're waiting for that to finish. And then we're actually making a second call here to get all the site scripts. So we're going to get those back so you can actually see that having been created. And then let me jump back here just to double check this. Nope, nobody's saying that they've lost the presentation, so that's always good. So then looking at the site designs here, so we're actually, just to make each of our little things independent, we're actually, we'll make this site script 5. We're creating another site script. We're actually creating a new site design. We're applying that. So the format for this is you create a site design, you pass it an object that has a bunch of properties. You're going to be familiar with this if you've done site script, site designs, without the PnPjs library, but so we give it an array of IDs of site scripts to apply as part of that design. So this can be one or more site scripts per design. We give it a title. I'll give that a different number. And then as well, you give it a web template to which these would apply. And then I'm also here, so we're awaiting creating a design. We're awaiting getting the URL for our site, so we're getting that off of the SP library. And then we're going to apply the site design through another method using the site design ID, which we get because it was just created, as well the web data. This is our web data from this web request. That's going to be the URL, the absolute URL to our web, so that we can apply the design to the correct web. Great. So I talked a bunch. Let's actually see this run. Whoops, that's our call there. So need to, and I did, should show you, I did run gulp serve no browser here before, so this is my online workbench. And let me just refresh this just to make sure we are on latest here. And find our web parts. This is going to be our November monthly web part. So you can see each of our little things is going to be running there, and they're going to come back in the order they come back. So those are loaded. The graph ones are loading up at the top. But we can see we created a site design, and we got all our site designs. So this is all the site designs currently in our site. We created these are all the site scripts. This is the site design. We applied that. So you can see this is the format it comes back as: outcome text, and so forth. I guess we've got a few little errors in there or whatnot. And then we can actually see up here our graph stuff worked. So this is all the groups that are in my little tenant. And then our batch actually ran. So I want to come look, and I think we'll have missed it because this wasn't running. So I'm going to hit F5 again. So if you look at the F5 tool, or F5 tool, the F12 tool, you'll actually be able to see in here as things spin up. Here's our actual batch request to the batch endpoint. So you can actually see we are batching our 2 requests, and we actually are getting our 2 responses back. So batching is working as you would expect there in the graph. And so that's all of those things running. And you saw no pop-ups, no extra anything on my that I needed to do to log into the graph. That's all being handled by the great work done by the SharePoint Framework team in 1.6 for the improved authentication experience. And you get that by just providing us that SP context we talked about at the start there to the setup method. And then one thing we get back a lot is with IE11, things don't necessarily work as well. We see some errors with IE11. So this is IE11. We're running the exact same code. And so, like, for example, here we've got this object doesn't support this property or method from. That's an issue with the array static method from. And so I want to make one small change. I want to jump back to this and want to highlight one final thing. We've added a new library. So this is at pnp/polyfill-IE11. And this is actually a roll-up of all the polyfills you need for the PnPjs stuff to work in IE11. And using this, you can run your code in IE11, and everything should, I think, work as you would expect. So I've made this change. And we'll take a look. So everything is spun back up. We're ready. And so I'm going to refresh this page. And when this refreshes, we should hopefully see everything once again work. And so now we can see we got our site script, the site design. All of these things now worked. Yay! Except, oops, we still have an error up here. Why do we have this error? Well, so this error, if you do a little work, is actually an error so the way the Azure Active Directory stuff works is it opens up a little iframe, and it goes and does the authentication for you and gets some tokens on your behalf. But there's a situation, so I set this up this way to fail. In IE11, I'm actually logged in with 2 separate accounts, my Microsoft corporate account and my personal tenant account. And so you're going to get this error in that case. Request is ambiguous, multiple user identities are available in the current request. So if you see this error, this is actually, there's an open bug for this in the SharePoint framework. repository. And one of the reasons I bring this up is since we use a lot of the SharePoint framework stuff under the hood, we are dependent on it. So if you see bugs, please let us know. But just a heads up, we might redirect you to SharePoint framework depending on what those bugs are, if that's a capability we happen to be taking advantage of. So have a look at that. But you can see this was just to highlight that we are dependent, but the real point of this is in IE11, using the polyfill stuff, everything worked as expected. And so one final note on that, this is actually, the polyfill library is separate from the other libraries in that it's not going to version each month. So once you've got that, that should be all you need, unless we have to add something, at which point we'll upversion that, but we'll let people know. But that's not something that we'll update monthly unless there's something we need to specifically to add. The question is, IE8 supported? No. Netscape Navigator also not supported. So both of those are not supported. IE11 is supported. There's a discussion right now, I guess. There's some performance or other issues around IE11 with some of the modern page stuff in SharePoint framework. There's an open issue about that, just a heads up. But this polyfill package is just about getting the PnPjs stuff working. So one final thing I wanted to highlight, we did get another great community contribution, made some great, I'm not going to run any code, but just want to sort of show you, we've got some great error handling and retry around some of the transient errors on Node that we'd see with the Node client. So that was, again, another great community contribution there. So you should see some improved performance when using the Node client. So if I can find this, and we'll switch back to the PowerPoint. That was my demo there, so hopefully you folks will see that and try out some of the great new stuff in PnPjs. And again, want to thank everybody from the community that helped build those new capabilities. It's really some great new stuff, and look forward to having some more stuff for you in the next monthly release. So stepping back in, I don't think we have a lot of time for Q&A, though I am going to scroll up and try and see if there's any questions I might have missed. Waldeck's a pretty cool guy. That's all just going to his head, guys. Okay, looks like I did not miss any questions directed at me. Great. So thank you all for the time there. Appreciate everyone joining the call. Again, if you have feedback on the number of calls we have, would love to hear that feedback on the survey. Please let us know. Everybody have a great rest of your week, and we will talk soon. Thanks all.